There are 1,000 ways madness enters the Imperium, but only one kind that makes the warp itself recoil in confusion. On High World Moros, in the year 987 M41, something crawled out of the darkness between stars. Not a daemon, not an alien, but something far more dangerous. A man who had looked into the abyss and decided to tell it a joke. This is the story of how one twisted soul nearly brought an entire world to its knees, and why the Inquisition still whispers his name in hushed, horrified tones. The Underhive of Moros had always been a cesspool of violence and desperation, but when the bodies started appearing with Glasgow smiles carved into their faces, even the hardened enforcers took notice. And if you're hungry for more tales from the dark millennium where madness and mayhem reign supreme, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who support the channel, and you'll want to witness every horrifying moment of what comes next. The first victim was Enforcer Sergeant Halleck, a 20-year veteran who'd seen every flavor of Underhive scum. They found him in Sector 47 Gamma, propped against a corroded Hab unit wall, his mouth split wide in a permanent grin. But it wasn't the mutilation that sent chills through the precinct house. It was the playing card clutched in his dead hand. A joker, hand-painted in blood. Arbitrator Captain Vex stood over the corpse, her carapace armor gleaming dully in the chemlight strips overhead. She'd served the Adeptus Arbits for 15 years, maintaining law in the festering bowels of Moros Prime. The Hive city stretched 30 kilometers above them, 300 billion souls stacked in rockcrete and desperation. "Third one this week," muttered Arbitrator Kane, his augretic eye whirring as it captured picked images. Same M.O. Toxicology says some kind of paralytic first, then the cutting while they're still conscious. Vex knelt beside the body. Halleck's eyes showed no fear, just confusion, as if he'd died trying to understand a joke he couldn't quite grasp. "Double the patrols in this sector, and get me a Vox link to Precinct Command. We're dealing with something organized." The Laughing Prophet, that's what the Underhivers started calling him, appeared 3 days later during a gang war in the Rust Quarter. The Slag Kings and Iron Disciples had been feuding over Promethium smuggling routes for months. Standard Underhive violence, brutal, stupid, predictable. Then he walked into the middle of the firefight. Witnesses described a tall, lean figure in a patchwork coat of flayed skin. Different colors, different textures, a motley of human leather. His face painted white with chemical compound that glowed in the darkness. His smile too wide, too red. But it was his eyes that everyone remembered, dark pits filled with something that made veteran killers look away. He walked through the crossfire like a man strolling through a garden, auto pistol rounds sparking off walls around him, yet none finding their mark. When he reached the center of the kill zone, he simply raised his hands and began to laugh. The sound cut through the gunfire like a knife, high-pitched, manic, infectious. One by one, the gang members stopped shooting. Then they started laughing too. Genuine, hysterical laughter that bent them double, dropped weapons from nerveless fingers. The Laughing Prophet spoke then, his voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "Why so serious, children of decay? You kill each other over scraps while the corpse god emperor watches from his rotting throne. I bring you a better way, a way of beautiful chaos, of freedom in madness." Gengar boss Vosk of the Slag Kings, a man who'd carved out his territory with a chain axe, found himself walking toward the stranger. Later, under interrogation, before his execution, Vosk would describe it as the happiest moment of his life, the freedom of not having to be afraid anymore. By dawn, 43 gang members from both sides had disappeared into the Underhive depths with the Laughing Prophet. Captain Vex reviewed the pick feeds 3 times, her jaw tightening. The grainy footage showed exactly what witnesses described: a lunatic in a flesh coat, turning hardened criminals into giggling devotees with words alone. "Cult activity," she said, tagging the file for immediate escalation. "Alert all precinct commanders. Full sweep of the lower sectors." But in the depths below, in a forgotten cathedral of rust and bone, the laughing prophet stood before his new congregation. His white-painted face split in that too-wide grin as he raised a curved blade inscribed with runes that hurt to look at. "Let me tell you all a joke," he whispered, somehow reaching every ear. "The Imperium says there's only war, that humanity must suffer eternally, that order is the only path." He began to laugh again, soft and terrible. But what if chaos is the answer? What if the real joke is that we've been taking it all so seriously? The blade flashed downward, biting into his own palm. Black, wrong, impossible blood welled from the wound and dripped on the corroded floor. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread in impossible patterns. And in the darkness above, something vast and terrible began to pay attention. The Laughing Prophet's cult had been born, and Hive World Moros would learn to fear the sound of laughter in the dark. Captain Vex assembled her strike team in Precinct Fortress Adamant at 0400 hours, 12 arbitrators in full riot gear, shock mauls charged, combat shotguns loaded with executioner rounds. They'd conducted 1,000 raids into the Underhive's festering depths. This should have been routine. Intelligence suggests the cult's operating out of the old Manufactorum district, sublevel 90, Vex briefed, her voice cutting through the armory's harsh lighting. Expect between 40 and 60 hostiles. Standard heretic MO, probably hopped up on Obscura or worse. We go in hard, we go in fast. The Emperor protects. "The Emperor protects," her team echoed, their voices steady with professional certainty. They descended into the Underhive via cargo elevator, the ancient machinery groaning as it carried them past hab levels, where millions lived and died without ever seeing the sun. The air grew thicker, more toxic. Vex's rebreather filtered out the worst of the chemical fog, but she could still taste the rot on her tongue. Sublevel 90 had been abandoned for decades, a vast graveyard of rusted machinery and collapsed structures. Their auspex pinged multiple heat signatures clustered in what had once been a promethium refinery. Vex gave the hand signal. Her team spread out in textbook formation, moving through the darkness with practiced efficiency. The first sign something was wrong when Arbitrator Kane triggered the tripwire. There was no explosion. Instead, a Voxcaster crackled to life, and that laugh, that horrible, infectious laugh, echoed through the ruins. Then music began playing, a distorted carnival tune that made Vex's teeth ache. "Welcome, welcome, officers of order," the Laughing Prophet's voice boomed from hidden speakers. "I've been expecting you. Tell me, do you know what makes a good punchline?" Vex motioned her team forward, ignoring the theatrics. They dealt with unstable cult leaders before. Secure the hostiles, purge the heretics, file the reports. Standard procedure. They breached the refinery's main chamber with flashbangs and righteous fury, but instead of the expected firefight, they found something that made Vex's blood run cold. The cultists weren't hiding. They stood in perfect formation, 43 of them in concentric circles around a makeshift altar. Each wore a crude mask painted with that same too-wide smile. They weren't armed. They were simply waiting. "Fire on my mark," Vex commanded, her shotgun trained on the nearest cultist. But Arbitrator Kane grabbed her arm. "Captain, look at their faces." She zoomed her helmet's visual augmentics. Beneath the masks, she could see their expressions, not the rabid fanaticism she expected, not even fear. They looked peaceful, content, like they'd finally understood some cosmic truth that had eluded them all their lives. "Do you get it yet?" The laughing prophet emerged from behind the altar, his flesh coat rippling in the chemlight. "The Imperium trains you to see enemies everywhere, to respond to heresy with violence. But what if I told you this is exactly what I wanted?" Vex pulled the trigger. The executioner round should have torn through his chest. Instead, it sparked off an invisible barrier 3 meters in front of him, a psychic shield that shimmered with sickly purple light. "Psyker!" Kane shouted. "He's manifesting without—" The laughing prophet moved faster than any human should. One moment he stood behind the altar. The next he was among Vex's team, that curved blade singing through the air. Arbitrator Rank's head separated from his shoulders before he could squeeze off a shot. Then the cultists attacked. They moved with inhuman coordination, their peaceful expressions never changing even as they threw themselves at the arbitrators with bare hands and improvised weapons. Vex's team responded with brutal efficiency, shock mauls crushing skulls, shotgun blasts tearing through unarmored flesh. But something was wrong. For every cultist that fell, another arbitrator began to laugh. First Kane, his augmentic eye sparking as his face split in a grin. Then Mordon, dropping her weapon to clutch her sides in hysterical mirth. "It's airborne," Vex realized, but too late. Her rebreather's filters hadn't been designed for psychic contamination. The laugh wasn't just sound, it was a mimetic virus, a psychic infection that spread through perception itself. She watched in horror as Arbitrator Thacia turned her shotgun on her own squadmate, giggling as she pulled the trigger. The chamber descended into chaos, order collapsing into a nightmarish parody of itself. Vex fought through the urge to laugh, her training and augmented willpower the only things keeping her sane. She grabbed the Voxcaster from her belt and triggered the emergency beacon. "This is Captain Vex, Precinct Adamant. We have a Class Omega psychic event, requesting immediate—" The laughing prophet stood before her, his blade dripping with the blood of her team. "The joke," he whispered, "is that you never had a chance. Every death, every bullet, every scream of defiance, it's all part of the ritual, and you just helped me complete Phase 1. Behind him, reality began to crack. Captain Vex staggered backward as reality fractured like broken glass around the laughing prophet. The air itself seemed to laugh, distorting into impossible angles that her mind struggled to process. She triggered her Vox again, static-laced voices of distant commanders demanding situation reports she couldn't give. "All units, fall back," she screamed. But only 3 arbitrators remained capable of hearing her. The rest were either dead or dancing among the cultists, their minds shattered by whatever psychic poison saturated the air. The retreat through sublevel 90 became a running nightmare. Behind them, that carnival music continued, now accompanied by screaming that might have been laughter or agony. Vex couldn't tell the difference anymore. She sealed the blast doors at the elevator shaft, buying precious minutes. When she reached Precinct Fortress Adamant, covered in the blood of her squad, the duty officer took one look at her face and triggered the facility lockdown. Vex barely made it to the briefing chamber before she collapsed, her report tumbling out in gasps between bouts of involuntary laughter she fought to suppress. Judge Arbitrator Kalen arrived within the hour, his power maul crackling at his belt, his face carved from granite and duty. He'd served the Adeptus Arbites for 40 years, seen every flavor of heresy the Hive could vomit up. But even he looked shaken as he reviewed Vex's helmet footage. "This isn't standard cult behavior," he muttered, rewinding the section where reality cracked. "The coordination, the psychic manifestation without immediate warp corruption symptoms. Captain, I'm escalating this to planetary command, and I'm requisitioning every arbitrator we have for a coordinated purge." Over the next 3 days, they assembled a force of 200 arbitrators and 3,000 local enforcers. The plan was simple: cordon off the entire Manufactorum district, flood it with tear gas and incendiaries, then sweep through with overwhelming force, standard heretic purge protocol scaled up. The operation launched at dawn. Vex watched from the command Chimera as her fellow officers descended into the Underhive in military formation, their Vox traffic crisp and professional. She'd been forbidden from joining the assault, too much exposure to the psychic contamination, they said, but she could monitor the feeds. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. The enforcers established the cordon. The arbitrators advanced through the abandoned sectors, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. Then they reached the refinery. "Contact! Contact! Multiple hostiles! Engaging!" The Vox erupted with gunfire and shouted commands. But the cultists weren't fighting back. Not really. They walked into the fire, still wearing those painted smiles, dying without resistance. It should have been a massacre. It should have been over in minutes. Judge Kalen's voice cut through the chaos. "Something's wrong. They're letting us kill them. Vex, check the pattern. Where are the bodies falling?" She pulled up the tactical map, overlaying the kill markers. Her blood turned to ice. The bodies formed a pattern, a vast symbol drawn in blood across multiple sectors, and at its center, the refinery where the Laughing Prophet had first cracked reality. It's a ritual. The deaths are fueling. The Vox feed screamed, not with voices, but with static that resolved into laughter. Every arbitrator, every enforcer in the assault force began reporting the same thing. Their helmet displays showing impossible images, their auspexes registering temperatures that couldn't exist, their reality anchors failing. Vex watched the picked feeds as seasoned officers dropped their weapons and began to dance, as enforcers turned on each other with imprived savagery, as Judge Kalen himself fell to his knees, his ancient face splitting in that too-wide grin. "Phase 2 complete," the Laughing Prophet's voice boomed from every Vox channel simultaneously. "Did you think violence would stop this? Every bullet is a prayer to the dark gods. Every death is applause for the grandest joke ever told." On the main screen, Vex watched as the Manufactorum district began to change. Rockcrete walls melted and reformed into twisted shapes. The very geometry of the Underhive warped, corridors connecting to places that shouldn't exist. And through it all, that laughter, echoing up from the depths, spreading like cancer through the Vox networks. She triggered the emergency channel to Planetary Command, her hands shaking. "This is Captain Vex, Arbite's Precinct Adamant. We have a catastrophic chaos incursion in sublevel 90, requesting immediate Astra Militarum support and," she swallowed hard, knowing what this meant, "inquisitorial intervention. The contamination is spreading. Emperor preserve us. It's spreading fast." In the Underhive depths, the Laughing Prophet stood before his altar of madness, arms spread wide as the warp bled through into reality. His cult hadn't been defeated, they'd been martyred, their deaths the punchline to a joke 3 phases in the making. And somewhere in the Imperium, the dark gods leaned forward, intrigued by this novel entertainment. The inquisitorial shuttle pierced Moros Prime's polluted atmosphere 72 hours after Vex's distress call. Inquisitor Voke emerged from the landing ramp like judgment incarnate, tall, severe, with augmetic eyes that glowed faint amber in the Hive's perpetual twilight. Behind her came her kill team, a Tempestus Scion sergeant, a sanctioned psyker bound in neural dampeners, and a Sisters of Battle seraphim whose face bore ritual scars of faith. Vex met them in the precinct's strategium, where hololithic displays showed the spreading contamination. What had been sub-level 90 was now a warped hellscape, visible even on orbital picked captures. The geometry made no sense. Corridors twisted back on themselves. Buildings existed in states of impossible suspension. And at the center, a cathedral of madness grew like a cancerous tumor. 1,600 dead or compromised, Voke reported, her voice hollow. The contamination spreads through perception. Anyone who sees the affected zone too long begins to laugh. We've sealed the access points, but we're losing ground. Entire hab blocks are going dark as the population turns. Inquisitor Voke studied the displays with clinical precision. How many souls in the contaminated sectors? Approximately 40 million, my lady. Acceptable losses. Voke's voice carried no emotion. I've ordered the 23rd Moros Siege Regiment to establish a kill zone perimeter. Nothing enters or leaves. If the contamination breaches containment, I will authorize exterminatus protocols. The casual mention of planetary annihilation sent ice through Vex's veins, but she nodded. She'd seen what the laughing prophet could do. Maybe death was mercy. However, Voke continued, exterminating 40 million Imperial citizens is inefficient. We go to the source. We kill this prophet. We collapse his ritual. We cauterize the wound. She turned to her kill team. Gear up. We descend in 1 hour. The journey into the contaminated zone required a Valkyrie gunship modified with psychic shielding and blessed by a full choir of sanctioned psychers. Even so, Vex could feel the wrongness pressing against her mind as they descended past the cordon. The Underhive had transformed into something from a fever dream. Buildings leaked colors that had no names. The air tasted of copper and carnival music. Citizens wandered the streets wearing those painted smiles, their bodies moving in synchronized patterns that hurt to watch. Some danced, some carved symbols into their own flesh. All of them laughed. The Valkyrie set down on a landing platform near the heart of the corruption. The moment the ramp dropped, the psychic pressure intensified. The sanctioned psyker, a withered woman named Yael, gasped and fell to her knees. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's showing them the truth behind the veil, the cosmic joke that underpins reality itself." Sister Seraphim Magdalene pressed a bolt pistol to Yael's temple. "Focus, witch, or I grant you the Emperor's mercy right now." Yael shuddered, her neural dampeners flaring with light as she wrestled her mind back under control. The ritual's almost complete. 3 phases: blood sacrifice, mass martyrdom, and now ascension. He's trying to tear a permanent warp rift. Not possession, not summoning. He wants to merge the material and immaterial into something new. Inquisitor Voke's jaw tightened. "Then we're out of time. Move." They advanced through streets that defied physics, the kill team moving in tight formation. Cultists approached them with open arms and painted smiles, offering flowers made of flesh and poems written in blood. The Tempestus Scion, Sergeant Cade, dropped them with precise lasgun shots, each kill efficient and emotionless. But the bodies didn't stay dead. They rose again, still smiling, wounds leaking that same black blood Vex had seen in the refinery. Not as zombies, as something worse, as believers so devoted that death itself was just another punchline. The cathedral stood before them, a twisted spire of bone and corroded metal that spiraled up into the Hive's superstructure. The laughing prophet's magnum opus. Reality screamed around it, the warp and material realm grinding against each other like tectonic plates. "He's inside," Yael gasped, her eyes bleeding from the psychic pressure. "I can feel him. He's laughing, always laughing, and the warp is laughing with him." Voke loaded blessed rounds into her bolt pistol, each shell inscribed with prayers of banishment. "Then let's show this heretic that the Imperium doesn't appreciate his sense of humor. For the Emperor." "For the Emperor," her team echoed. They entered the cathedral, and the doors sealed behind them with the finality of a coffin closing. Inside, reality had given up entirely. The laughing prophet waited on a throne of twisted human spines, his flesh coat now alive with writhing faces. Above him, the warp bled through in a riot of impossible colors. And he was still laughing. "The finale approaches," he announced, spreading his arms. "Welcome to the punchline." The cathedral's interior defied sanity. Pillars of bone twisted upward into a ceiling that was simultaneously too close and infinitely distant. The floor rippled like water, reflecting screaming faces pressed against reality's membrane from the other side. And everywhere, that laughter, not just from the laughing prophet, but from the warp itself. Inquisitor Voke raised her bolt pistol and fired. The blessed round should have obliterated the heretic's skull. Instead, it froze mid-air 3 meters from his throne, spinning slowly as if caught in invisible amber. "Do you know what's funny?" The laughing prophet rose from his throne, his movements fluid and wrong. "The Imperium thinks it can defeat chaos with faith and fury. But faith is just another joke we tell ourselves. And fury?" He gestured, and the frozen bolt round reversed course, screaming back toward Voke. Sister Magdalen's jump pack roared to life, tackling the Inquisitor aside as the round detonated against a pillar. The Seraphim came up firing, her twin bolt pistols spitting consecrated death. The prophet danced between the shots, impossibly graceful, his laughter harmonizing with the gunfire's percussion. Sergeant Cade triggered his hotshot volley gun, laser beams painting the air crimson. Several struck home, burning through the prophet's ruined material, but beneath the ruined material was skin covered in shifting tattoos, chaos runes that crawled across his body like living things, already healing the wounds. "He's channeling directly from the warp," Yael gasped, her dampener sparking. "Every second makes him stronger. The ritual's in its final phase. He's becoming a living conduit." Vex, who'd insisted on joining despite her contamination exposure, steadied her combat shotgun. "Then we shut down the conduit. Yael, can you disrupt his connection?" The psyker's face twisted in concentration. "I can try, but it'll burn me out, maybe kill me." "Do it," Voke commanded, reloading. "We all serve the Emperor. Some of us just serve faster." Yael closed her eyes and reached into the warp. Her body convulsed as psychic energy coursed through her, the neural dampeners overloading in cascades of sparks. Blood ran from her eyes, her ears, her nose, but her will held. The laughing prophet's smile finally faltered as invisible chains wrapped around his connection to the immaterium. "Now!" Yael screamed. "I can't hold him long!" The kill team struck as one. Magdalen's chainsword screamed to life as she dove from above, the blessed blade carving through psychic shields that Yael had weakened. Cade's grenades detonated in precise sequence, collapsing sections of the cathedral. Voke charged forward, her power sword crackling with disruptive energy. The prophet met them with inhuman ferocity. His curved blade parried Magdalen's chainsword, the impact sending shockwaves through the chamber. He twisted away from Voke's thrust, his free hand catching Cade's throat and lifting the soldier off his feet with impossible strength. "You still don't get the joke," he hissed, his painted face inches from Cade's. Every death feeds the ritual. Every act of violence is applause for the performance. You can't win by fighting. That's the punchline. Vex saw her moment. While the prophet was distracted, she grabbed one of Cade's crack grenades and charged forward, not at the prophet, but at the throne itself. The bone structure pulsed with warp energy. It was the ritual's anchor point, the physical focus holding the rift open. She slammed the grenade into the throne's base and dove aside. As it detonated, the explosion tore through the cathedral's foundation. The prophet's head snapped around, his smile finally disappearing. "No, you can't! The ritual requires—" Yael, her body nearly destroyed by the psychic strain, channeled every remaining ounce of power into a final banishment. The warp connection snapped like an overstressed cable. The prophet screamed, not with laughter now, but with genuine agony as the dark god's attention withdrew, leaving him suddenly, terribly mortal. Inquisitor Voke's power sword punched through his chest, the blessed blade burning away the chaos corruption that had sustained him. He slumped forward, black blood bubbling from his lips. "The joke," he whispered, still trying to smile. "The joke is, you think you've won." His body collapsed into ash and spite. The cathedral began to crumble, reality reasserting itself with violent determination. The kill team ran for the exit as the warp rift collapsed, dragging cultists and corrupted matter back into the Imperium with screams that faded into silence. They emerged into an underhive that was scarred but stable. The spreading contamination had stopped. The laughter had finally ended. But as Vex looked back at the collapsing cathedral, she could have sworn she heard it, one last distant laugh echoing from the warp's depths. Some jokes, she realized, never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to be told again. The Purge of Hive World Moros lasted 6 months. 40 million souls were put to the question by the Inquisition's interrogators. Those who could prove their minds remained untainted were granted the Emperor's mercy, a quick death and cremation. Those who laughed at the wrong moment, who showed even the slightest signs of corruption, were consigned to the pyres while still screaming. Captain Vax survived, though she wished she hadn't. The Inquisition's mind scourers stripped away 3 months of memories, excising any psychic contamination along with pieces of her identity. She no longer remembered her team's faces. She couldn't recall why she sometimes woke screaming or why certain sounds made her reach for a weapon that wasn't there. Yael, the sanctioned psyker, lived for 17 hours after the cathedral's collapse. Her last words, whispered to Inquisitor Voke through burned lips, were never recorded in any official report, but Voke carried them like a burden. "He showed me the truth. The universe doesn't care about our suffering. It's all just background noise to something vast and terrible and laughing. The Emperor can't hear our prayers over the sound." Inquisitor Voke classified the entire incident under vermilion-level secrecy. The official reports stated only that a minor cult uprising had been suppressed with acceptable casualties. The Laughing Prophet's true name was never discovered, if he'd ever had one. His origins remained a mystery. Some whispered he'd been a fallen psyker. Others claimed he was a daemon wearing human skin. A few theorized he'd been touched by all 4 chaos gods simultaneously, a living expression of the warp's infinite capacity for cruelty. But Voke knew the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He'd been human. Just a man who'd looked into the abyss of the 41st millennium's endless horror and decided that if existence was meaningless, he might as well make it entertaining. In the grim darkness where there is only war, he'd chosen to laugh at the cosmic joke and nearly dragged an entire world into the punchline with him. The Manufactorum district was sealed with 3 meters of rockcrete and blessed by 100 priests. Warning symbols covered every surface. But sometimes on quiet nights, enforcers patrolling the cordon reported hearing something from beneath the seal. A faint sound, like distant carnival music, like laughter echoing up from depths that should be silent. Moros Prime endured, as the Imperium always endured. Scarred, diminished, but unbroken. The Hive's billions returned to their grinding existence, unaware how close they'd come to damnation. Above them, the Astronomican's light continued its eternal vigil, the Emperor's psychic beacon burning across the galaxy, holding back the darkness. But in the warp, where time and space held no meaning, something stirred. The Laughing Prophet's soul had been destroyed, yes, but ideas once loosed upon the galaxy could never truly die. They spread like infection, jumping from mind to mind, waiting for the right combination of despair and madness to take root again. On a dozen worlds, in 100 underhives, troubled souls stared into the darkness and wondered if the universe's cruelty might be funny if you had the right perspective. If order and law were just cosmic setups, waiting for the perfect anarchic punchline. The Imperium's Inquisitors marked these stirrings in their classified reports. They increased their vigilance, knowing that chaos never truly slept, and that madness wearing purpose was the most dangerous heresy of all. Captain Vex returned to duty after 6 months of rehabilitation. She never spoke of what happened in Sublevel 90. But sometimes, during the long watches of the Underhive night, she found herself thinking about the Laughing Prophet's final words, "You think you've won." And despite herself, despite her loyalty and faith, and the Emperor's light burning in her soul, she wondered if he'd been right, if victory against chaos was just another joke, and they were all waiting for the punchline. The Emperor protects, but in the grim darkness of the far future, protection is never permanent. The war never ends. The darkness never retreats. And somewhere in the void between stars, new threats are already stirring, some wearing fangs, some bearing blades, and some wearing smiles painted too wide across faces that have forgotten what genuine joy feels like. The 41st millennium grinds on, humanity endures, and the warp continues to laugh.